We realize that someone is trapped inside a small wooden box. His hands are tied, his mouth is covered, and there's barely enough room for him to move. The man panics and tries to call for help, but nobody can hear him. He has no idea where he is or whether he's underground. All he knows is that he's trapped inside a coffin-sized box with almost no air. Desperate, he manages to uncover his mouth and lights a small lighter, giving himself just enough light to see. That's when he notices something that could help him. A small blade. After struggling for a while, he manages to free his hands. Now he can finally move, but there's still one major problem. The box won't open. He pushes against the lid. Nothing. He tries again. Still nothing. And then he hears something. A phone is vibrating somewhere near him. Paul quickly searches his pockets and discovers a phone, but there's something strange about it. It's not his. The language on the phone is unfamiliar to him, but Paul doesn't waste time. He immediately calls emergency services. When someone answers, Paul explains that he's trapped underground and desperately needs help. He tells them his name is Paul Conroy, an American truck driver working in Iraq. He explains that he and several other drivers were delivering supplies when they were attacked. When he woke up, he was already trapped inside the box. The emergency operator is confused because the call appears to be coming from somewhere completely different. Paul realizes that the operator has no idea where he actually is. But Paul refuses to give up. He tries calling his wife Linda, hoping she'll answer. She doesn't, so he leaves her a desperate voicemail. Paul then tries another route. He contacts customer service and eventually gets a number connected to the FBI. When an agent answers, Paul explains everything from the beginning. He says that he works as a truck driver in Iraq and was traveling with other drivers when a group of people suddenly attacked them. He remembers people surrounding their trucks and throwing objects at them before everything went black. When Paul woke up, he was inside the coffin. The agent asks him to describe exactly what happened, but before Paul can explain everything, the phone signal disappears. Paul panics. He desperately moves the phone around, searching for a signal. Finally, the signal returns. He immediately tries calling again. This time, the call goes somewhere else, but the connection disappears before he can properly explain his situation. Paul is beginning to lose hope. Then he notices something. The phone has a missed call, and fortunately, he still has enough signal to call the number back. Someone answers. The voice on the other end immediately calls Paul a soldier. Paul corrects him. He's not a soldier. He's just a truck driver, but the caller doesn't care. He tells Paul that he knows he's American and then gives him an impossible demand. Paul has until 9 p.m. to get $5 million. Otherwise, nobody is coming for him. Paul is stunned. He explains that his family doesn't have anywhere near that kind of money. Why would he leave America and come all the way to Iraq to work if they were rich? But the caller isn't interested in Paul's excuses. He tells Paul to contact the American government and demand the money. Now Paul understands what he's dealing with. If he wants to survive, he needs to get his government involved. Paul remembers a friend named Donna and calls her. When Donna answers, Paul asks if she's near a computer. She says yes. Paul begs her to find a government contact number for him. At first, Donna is in a hurry and doesn't understand why Paul is acting so strangely. Paul becomes frustrated and starts yelling. Donna hangs up. Paul immediately calls back. This time he apologizes and calmly explains that he desperately needs her help. Donna gives him the number. Paul calls the government and explains his situation, but then something strange happens. The woman on the phone already knows his name. Paul immediately asks how she knows who he is. She explains that someone received the voicemail he had left earlier. Paul tells her that his captor wants $5 million by 9 p.m., but the government representative tells him they cannot simply pay a ransom. They don't negotiate with terrorists. Paul becomes desperate. He tells her that if they don't help him, he's going to die inside that box. The woman eventually gives Paul another contact, a man named Dan Brenner. Dan is involved with the group trying to locate and rescue people in situations like this. When Dan answers, he already knows about Paul's situation. He tells Paul not to panic. They're going to find him. Dan also gives Paul some practical advice. Keep the phone on silent to conserve battery. Don't waste the lighter. And most importantly, stay calm. But before Paul can feel relieved, the unknown caller contacts him again. The kidnapper asks whether Paul has contacted the government. Paul tells him the government refuses to pay. The man becomes angry. He tells Paul that he doesn't consider himself a terrorist. In his mind, America came into his country, destroyed his way of life, and now Americans are trying to rebuild what they damaged. Paul insists that he has nothing to do with any of that. He's just a truck driver trying to earn a living, but the caller doesn't care. He tells Paul that his company is working on construction projects in Iraq. Paul argues that those projects are supposed to create jobs. The caller disagrees. He believes America destroyed his country and is now pretending to fix it. Then he gives Paul a new demand. Paul must record a video asking the American government to pay the ransom. Paul tells him there's no chance the government will pay $5 million, so the caller lowers the demand. $1 million. Then he tells Paul to look near his feet. Paul finds a small bag. Inside are a flashlight, a small knife, and a note. The note contains instructions for the video before Paul can process everything. Dan calls again. Paul gives him the kidnapper's number. Dan promises that they're working on tracking the caller and getting Paul out. He even tells Paul that they've rescued someone from a similar situation before. For the first time, Paul feels like there might actually be hope. Then Paul decides to call his mother. Unfortunately, she isn't mentally clear enough to understand what's happening. She doesn't even recognize him properly. Paul becomes emotional. He tells her that he loves her and that this might be the last time they ever speak. As Paul is struggling to hold himself together, another message arrives. It's a photograph. A woman is being held by the same people. Paul immediately calls the kidnapper and begs him not to hurt her. He explains that she has children. The caller responds that he has children too, and only one of them is still alive. Then he gives Paul an ultimatum. Paul has seconds to record the video, otherwise the woman will be killed. The call ends. Paul has no choice. He opens the note and records exactly what the kidnappers want. He says that he has been taken hostage in Iraq and that $1 million must be paid by 9 p.m. for his release. Paul sends the video, but things get even worse. Paul suddenly realizes that he isn't completely alone inside the coffin. Something else is moving around him. He looks closer. A snake has somehow gotten inside through a small opening. Paul panics and tries to scare it away using his lighter. After a tense struggle, the snake finally disappears through the opening. Paul takes a breath, but he barely has time to relax before another video arrives. It's the same woman from the photograph. She says that the government refused to meet the kidnappers' demands. Then the video suddenly cuts to chaos. Paul is horrified. He realizes that the woman wasn't saved, and if nobody came for her, what makes him think anyone will come for him? A short time later, Dan calls. He's angry that Paul recorded the hostage video. Paul asks why. Dan explains that the kidnappers uploaded the video online, and tens of thousands of people have already seen it. The video wasn't just meant to scare Paul. It was designed to put public pressure on the government. Paul feels betrayed. He tells Dan that the government didn't save the woman either. Dan insists that they are still trying to locate the kidnapper, but they haven't been able to trace the exact location yet. Paul suddenly remembers something. He can hear a mosque nearby. Dan realizes this could be an important clue. If Paul can hear it, they may finally be getting close. Then suddenly, boom, a massive explosion shakes the ground. The wooden box cracks, and dirt begins pouring inside. Paul immediately understands the danger. If the opening isn't blocked, he'll be buried completely. He quickly uses a piece of clothing to cover the hole, but the dirt keeps pushing through. Paul checks his watch. It's already 8 p.m. That means there's only 1 hour left, 1 hour before the deadline, 1 hour before his chances of survival become even smaller. Dan calls again. He explains that the explosion may have been caused by an American airstrike targeting the area. Dan believes the kidnappers may have been caught in it. He tells Paul they're getting closer, but Paul no longer believes him. He's exhausted. He's running out of air. He's surrounded by dirt, and his phone battery is slowly dying. Paul repeatedly tries calling his wife, but the calls won't go through. Then suddenly his phone rings. It's the kidnapper. Paul realizes the man survived. The caller asks where the money is. Paul tells him he doesn't know. The kidnapper then makes an even more disturbing demand. He tells Paul to injure himself and record another video. Paul refuses. The caller threatens his family. That's when Paul realizes something terrifying. The kidnapper knows where his family lives. Paul immediately tries calling Linda. She doesn't answer, so he leaves her a warning. He tells her to stay inside and not leave the house. Then Paul does exactly what the kidnapper demanded. He records the video and sends it. By now, Paul is completely exhausted. He's in pain, terrified, and convinced that nobody is coming. Then he sees something above him. Light. For a moment, Paul believes he's finally been rescued, but it's not real. It's only a vision. He's still trapped. He's still underground, and the dirt continues filling the coffin. Then Dan calls one final time. He tells Paul that they're almost there. Paul tries to hold on. The situation becomes even more desperate as the dirt continues rising around him, and then finally Paul's phone rings again. It's Linda. She asks where he is. She tells him that she saw his video on the news and wants him to come home. Paul doesn't tell her how bad things really are. Instead, he simply tells her that he's okay. He tells her that the Americans are coming to rescue him. He promises that he'll be home soon. Then he tells her he loves her and hangs up. Meanwhile, Dan and his team are digging through the ground, desperately searching for Paul. Paul can hear them getting closer for the first time. It sounds like he's actually going to make it. Dan suddenly shouts that they've found the coffin. They're finally opening it. Paul waits. The dirt is almost completely surrounding him now. Dan opens the coffin, but then there's a long silence. Dan looks inside, and his voice changes. Oh my God, this isn't Paul. The coffin belongs to another man named Mark White. The team has just spent all this time searching in the wrong location. Dan realizes the horrible truth. They never found Paul. Paul is still trapped somewhere else. Dan can barely speak. Paul, I'm sorry, we couldn't find you. Paul hears the words, and in that final moment he realizes that nobody is coming. The dirt completely surrounds him. His lighter goes out, and the screen fades into darkness. Paul Conroy is left buried alive inside the coffin, and that's where the story ends.